And there's your cue.
All right, everybody, welcome to Ragin' With. We've got a special guest this evening, Jim Tanner. Dig Two Graves. What the heck is that about? Sounds crazy. Sounds like my kind of book. We'll be right back after this. This is episode 47. Wherever you're tuning in, hit the subscribe button. We'll be right back.
Ragin'.
Hey, you guys. We are Raging with Jim Tanner, and we are simulcasting to Geek Insider, Indie Volt, Comics and More New Jersey, as well as Raging AVC. Hit the button, hit the subscribe button, and share this out with your friends. We are talking with Jim Tanner about his creative journey, plus Dig Two Graves, the graphic novel that is out on Indiegogo right now. If you're tuning in, make sure that you check out the show notes because the links are there. Follow him everywhere. Just don't peek in his windows because that's weird. I'm going to drop this card in just a second. Dig Two Graves. After the brutal murder of her family, Miranda Stone is left with a desire for revenge. That sounds pretty deep. Let me drop the card. Hey, Jim.
Hello.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm well, thank you. How are you all doing?
Doing well. My co-host here is dealing with some hurricane-itis stuff and just munching on some ramen and beans, I guess. Girl, I feel for you.
Don't knock my menu, Meredith. Some gourmet shit I've been coming up with.
How many ways can you make ramen noodles? And Jim Tanner, you were telling me that you are well inland away from water.
Oh, yeah. We're in Colorado, so I'm as far away as possible.
Oh, but you get the snow.
It's not as bad as you would think, unless you're really high in the mountains.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of people are high in the mountains up there.
That's true. It is Colorado.
Whatever do you mean? So, Jim, on Raging With, we love talking about the creative journey. And I kind of want to know, back to when little Jim was looking at the comic books and going, yeah, I want to do that. When was that moment for you?
I was probably about 8, give or take, when I got my first comic. And I really got into it, especially when I started on the Chris Claremont X-Men run. I became obsessed with that. And I started actually writing and drawing at that point my own comics. Well, X-Men comics. They were like 4 pages long. And I thought those were just the greatest stories within 4 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really started just my love of writing. And just at the time, I wanted to also be a comic book artist. But my art never really made it to the point where I wanted it to go. So, but I still enjoyed writing. So I kept doing that. And I also, outside of comics, I started writing like screenplays, short stories, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about 8 years old. I remember when I first got my first book.
Okay. All right. So 8 years old, pretty impressionable. And then you said that you tried drawing. Have you continued with drawing just as a habit or, just as, I don't know, to relax or anything like that? Or you're like, nah, writing's my lane.
Well, it's with myself when it came to drawing, I always had trouble with like it had to be perfect whenever I drew, and I compared myself, even at a young age, like Jim Lee or all the talents. Was like, oh, this is terrible, and I was always super harsh of it. So I kind of defeated myself that way, and it was like that with some other things. But when it was with writing, I was more open to be like, it can be bad, and I can just have fun with it. So I do draw. Not as much as I used to. I mostly do storyboard, or like if I need to, lay out some of the ideas of what I'm thinking, like panel wise, I'll do a quick sketch, things like that. So, like I say, I do well enough to get the point across.
Right, right. Yeah, it's not easy and kind of like one of those things where yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are some people who can do it all. We hate them. No, we don't. Uh but that's kind of cool that you're able to kind of lay it out uh for people. Tell me about your the scripting process for you and how you're able to convey those ideas to your artists then.
So it kind of depends on the artist I'm working with because I do have several I've worked with over the years. For the most part, when I pay artists, I know some of them like to have the freedom to come up with the panels themselves, but others just kind of want more of an idea and they don't really want to have to think too much on it. So when I write, I actually write out every panel, the angles, the type of shot it should be, and then lay it out that way.
Mm.
And I always tell the artist, obviously, if this isn't going to fit properly, adjust it as needed. I think I started doing it that way because I wanted the book to be as much as mine as possible. So being just a little over, was that micromanaging the layout was kind of my attempt at that. So, but again, some artists don't like that, and I try to cater what I write to them, leaving it a little more open for interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, finding that that happy medium with them, uh, especially if you haven't worked with an artist before,
Yeah,
that's a lot of give and take there.
definitely. The artist on Dig Two Graves, Vaughn, I've worked with now for a few years, and I kind of know what he likes to do, and he knows how I write. So again, I'll lay it out for him so he can see what or at least he has an idea of what I'm seeing, and then he takes that and just interprets it his own way, and it's a really good fit, I think.
Hmm. One of the battles that we've had, it seems consistent with some of our guests, especially the writers, is being able to kind of figure out what kind of script is best. How much do they describe it? Some of them are very like you said, micromanaging. They know where each panel is, what it's supposed to look like. You know, they have this vision in their head. And then others are just like, here's my script, have fun, you know, and it's just like kind of fly by your pants and trust your artist and stuff. When you're kind of putting it together, because from my experience in this, and I've been on my own quest for about a year and a half. I'm still learning. Every day's learning something. Um, as a writer, how did you come about learning the importance of that layout, the page turn, and kind of fitting your script around that?
Well, for me, things that I used when I was first starting was obviously I was looking at examples of other comic scripts,
Mhm.
and then there were several books out there. I can't think of the name. I think Neil Adams might have wrote one, but at the top of my head, I can't. I can see it. I can't remember the title of it. But there are plenty of books out there about that. Um, and one thing I liked about comics that I learned first thing is when, like, if you write like a script or like a script for a movie, it's very specific formatting. It's very much you can't deviate from it unless you're somebody like Quentin Tarantino who knows he's going to direct his own script. He writes it; it still fits, but you notice he'll actually describe sequences more so than you would see in another one. But with comics, I found that there wasn't such a rigid rule to how your script has to be laid out,
Mhm.
and you would look at examples from writers from both like Marvel and DC, and their scripts would be completely different, the layouts. And so I kind of just took what I liked best and tried to format it closest to some of the pros, but while keeping it something that I felt it was something I could, easily, use for myself.
You mentioned the word prose, and I want to touch on that a little bit. So, when you start off with the story, um, as a writer, do you think of it in prose first and then kind of break it down into a script, or do you just go gung ho because you see it in your head already?
There's a few ways that I approach it. Normally, whenever I've written, I usually have a beginning, middle, and I mean that's pretty typical. But um, with some books, like with Dig Two Graves, where we are right now with the book 3 and 4, which is being worked on now,
Mhm.
I had a chance to or a choice to make where I had to either just get right into the action and just kind of push the story forward, or I had to actually let the characters and the story um, it go out in a natural way, like let them breathe and let them be real. And it's a little bit of a slower burn that way, and it would drag the story out a couple more issues. But I felt that was a more of an honest way of doing it, as opposed to just trying to force everything to fit into like, oh, let's just hit these points real quick so we can get to the next point, from A to
Right.
B. Um,
That drives me crazy.
yeah,
As a reader, when I'm enjoying a story arc and then all of a sudden it feels like they chopped it or something,
yeah.
because it's like, oh, we got to stay within this many minutes in a movie, or we have to stay within this many pages in a comic book, and it feels rushed and something is left behind.
It,
So yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say exactly, and it doesn't feel natural to the character.
Hmm.
You're almost as if you're taking away their act, something that the readers would appreciate about that, just to push it. And I decided not to go that route, and I'm grateful I didn't, because I think the story's richer for it.
Right. So when you're going from like book to book, because of these story arcs, we love that mini arc within the series. Because you were mentioning books 1 through 4. 3 and 4 being worked on right now.
Mhm.
So there's a grander arc, but within each book or within each like mini series within that, there's the conflict and the resolution and things like that, and try to carry that through. Are Because of that, does it affect your writing? Or are you like, no, let's expand this. It's okay to go a couple pages over.
I mean, I know there's people who are very strict to the 3 act structure.
Yeah.
And when I write, that's why my books typically come in well over 40 pages, because I think what average comic, like from like DC, Marvel, whatever, like 25 pages, give or take.
Yeah, about 24 with ads and stuff
Yeah.
sometimes.
And I was like, I just felt really limited with that, and I was like,
Hmm.
you know what, this is my book. I can make him as long as I
You can do
want.
whatever you want. You're an indie
Exactly.
creator. Yeah.
So, and I try to keep to the 3 act structure, because I know there's certain people who can who can stray from that, and it works, and it makes for a very unique, entertaining experience. Um, so I don't want to put myself in those categories yet, but I still try to follow all the same rules as most. But yeah, I will sometimes go a little bit longer
Hmm.
in each story.
Right. So when it comes to picking up your books, because you've got Dig Two Graves right now on Indiegogo, it's a trade paperback. So I'm assuming that's the combination of 1 and 2.
Correct. And there's going to be a few extra, like I said, so between 1 and 2, you're about 85, 86 pages.
Hmm.
We're probably going to put a little extras in there. And then we're actually going to be closer to about 100 with all the extra content, variant art, concept art, things like that, that's going to go in there.
Very
Uh,
cool.
yeah.
So when putting that together, did it because of how many pages it was already, because you said like they average about 40 pages, so I mean that's pretty hefty. Was that part of the deciding factor of putting the trade paperback together for this for 1 and 2, and then maybe another one for 3 and 4 later?
So, yeah, so we had a Kickstarter
Hmm.
for just the floppy. We did all the variant covers and all that kind of stuff that goes with the Kickstarter. And then I had a few people reach out saying, "Hey, I missed the Kickstarter. How can I get in?" And I thought, well, I was kind of interested in looking into Indiegogo, because I heard they had like a store, and I've especially learned there seems to be 2 different groups of fans: ones who will only buy Indiegogo and ones who will only buy Kickstarter. So I want to
Hmm.
try to reach out to both audiences, but I didn't want to make it the same thing for
Right.
Kickstarter, so that way that audience didn't feel like I was trying to double dip now on Indiegogo. So I wanted to be unique to them. So, and also for the Indiegogo fans, so they know, hey, they're getting something that's just for them. So that's when I decided I wanted to try the graphic novel. I just thought it'd be unique. I know it'll be big enough for that. And again, so there's not as many reward tiers as like say Kickstarter, because I wanted to keep it kind of streamlined.
Hmm.
Um, but that's kind of the main reason why I decided to go with the graphic novel for this one, just because I thought, one, it'd be a good value and it'd give people who maybe, because I've never done Indiegogo, so I'm assuming most people who would purchase it through there maybe never saw the first Kickstarters, so they're unfamiliar. So this allows them to get the whole story up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, why not both platforms? You're touching on two different audiences. Sometimes, they are dedicated to one platform or the other. I mean, it has its pros and cons. What has your experience been like so far?
With Indiegogo, it's been a bit of an uphill battle.
Hmm.
It seems it's a little bit harder to reach or to find the audience to let them know about it. Um, so I've been working with a lot of other people like yourselves, people who just have shows who have done Indiegogos, and they've given a lot of great advice and a lot of things. Like they say, try Twitter. That seems to be where the Indiegogo crowds tend to, I guess, get their information.
Hmm.
So I've been trying to, I've been using people's advice. But otherwise, I like the format. It was easy to set up. I'm interested in the store feature that they have for after the campaign. And really, right now, it's just trying to get the word out while there's still time for people.
Right, right. And because I was taking a look at your campaign, we're going to bring that up on the second part of the our hour. But yeah, so you have it set at a flexible goal, which is kind of cool. And because there's that two option thing with the flexible goal and then the fixed goal.
Yeah.
And then I know from my experience on buying stuff through Indiegogo, they take it right out of my credit card like immediately, which is great because on Kickstarter I've gotten into trouble a couple of times. I was just backing things and all of a sudden they're all coming out at the same time as my electric bill.
I've had that
It's
happen
like,
too with
whoops.
Kickstarter. It's like you get the alert and you're like, oh, I need to go back and fix that.
Yeah. It's like, oh man, sorry. Yeah, it's two different platforms. I like the idea that you're kind of catering to both by giving something different to each campaign. I think that's important.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't. I haven't been able to find too many people who've done both. I know obviously people do, but I
Mhm.
haven't found anybody that I know to speak of it. And the few that thought about it were all saying the same thing. You don't want to upset one audience over the other by saying, "Hey, here's the same things I just offered them." So we
Right.
definitely wanted to be as original and different as we can while still offering them something unique.
Hmm. Now, I have my own opinions about storefronts, websites, and things like that. And you mentioned that Indiegogo has kind of like the storefront feel to it.
Yeah, I was just from talking to people who have run Indiegogo campaigns were explaining that to me.
Hmm.
It sounds like a good feature to keep your book up until the next one comes out, so people can still be getting information maybe through there, and still have a chance to pick up any copies that they may not, they might not have had a chance to get right before the next one comes out.
Right. So, does that, when it comes to finding a home for your book, I guess for like after the Kickstarter or whatever, how do you feel about that? Like being your store as opposed to maybe developing your own website?
I mean, for me, it's fine right now because at the moment, the only book I am actively selling is Just Dig Two Graves. I have another book in the works called Hellrider, and when that
Hmm.
comes out, we'll have a few more to offer. The previous books, I decided to just put them back and put them away, just because we're in kind of a new direction, new art. So I don't know if a website would really the website would just be to sell maybe a couple books and then different various prints. So it seems like that might be a little overkill for what I need at the moment.
Right.
Hopefully later that'll be a better option.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Good thinking too, because if you had asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said everybody should have a website. And I still, in a way, I still think so. But then you have places like Linktree and other places where you can put all your links, and it's kind of like that business card on the internet.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it.
and
Yeah,
oh, sorry, I was just gonna say yeah, and for right now it's just a sea of just getting people to go to a website's hard enough, so it's easier right now to get them to go to a site they know.
it's
So
hard enough getting them to an Indiegogo.
exactly. So, but I am working on a website, so eventually there will be one. I agree with you. There should be to a point if you're going to be ongoing. At some point, it's good to have a website.
Hmm.
Just for myself, it's just something that's more on the back burner for a later time.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of things that go on with that because longevity of a website helps with the algorithms and stuff like that, using the right keywords, search engine optimization. It's like, oh my gosh, now there's this whole other learning curve, you know. I'm like, am I ever going to get off this learning curve? Do you ever feel frustrated like that?
Oh, constantly. I am very behind the times, it seems, especially when it comes to social media. So I'm always playing catch up and like just taking hints as I get them and trying, whatever. Just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, maybe just because I'm a little bit older, social media, I didn't get into it until somewhat recently. So, and it just evolves so quickly. You're always having to change your tactics.
Oh my gosh. I remember when the internet first came out and I was just like, I gotta get on that. I feel like I'm so far behind.
I know. I wish I had just got a little bit sooner. I could have been one of those already early internet adopters with million
Right?
YouTube subscribers.
So tell me about Dig Two Graves. Where did this idea come from? Because it sounds pretty dark.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like the 70s, 80s revenge movies like, Mad Max or lesser knowns like Rolling Thunder. I've always kind of just enjoyed the revenge story in general. Um, I don't know, probably because I was watching rated R movies way too young, so those always kind of got ingrained in there. But I had an idea for a story, and I started around 2008 with it, so it's been around for a while. And
Mhm.
eventually, I just started to kicking around a couple ideas, writing them down as I went along, and it's really just that. When I write stories, I don't traditionally write, especially comics. I don't actually write superhero stories. I did once, and it never went anywhere. So I like to keep my stories grounded. And with this one, I thought there was a good story, a way to bring it, those old revenge stories into a newer light, keeping it the grittiness of those, but still being entertaining, for a wide audience. I think it is a very dark book, though. It touches on a lot of darker themes. I had to, I researched with, friends who dealt with PTSD, former soldiers. I wanted to
Mhm.
incorporate some of what they've dealt with into the book. So that so yeah, it's been a long journey process, but I think so far the story is going really well, and I hope people will enjoy it as well.
Because I'm kind of curious with Miranda. I mean, were you kind of sitting on the couch? Did you wake up from a dream? Were you driving? Like, what popped into your head that said, I need to write her story? Because I know for me, every once in a while, I'll wake up from a dream because one line of dialogue just keeps repeating and repeating. And I'm like, all right, I'm up. I'm writing it down. What was kind of like that moment for you? Or was it this kind of more of a long game? Because you did say that you started this in 2008.
So I had a scene from a script I wrote a long time ago
Mhm.
that I really liked, and that script never went anywhere. But I always liked the scene, and I always kept it. And then as time went on, I had another scene I'd written, and they weren't necessarily connected. And then as I started to think of this story, I realized both of those would be perfect for what I was, this story that I was kind of just starting to formulate. And all of a sudden, once I incorporated those, it just kind of went in full motion. As for the character Miranda, at the time, this was 2008, 2007 might be, depending on when I actually, started writing down stuff. There wasn't a lot of female led heroes or just, in general.
Mhm.
And so I was like, yeah, I haven't seen that, and I'd really like that. I was raised by a single mother, so I've always had strong female presence in my life, and I wanted to incorporate that into a story. The downside is it took so long. Now it's not as unique as it might have been 10 plus years ago. But that's kind of where Miranda came from, is a chance to tell it from a different perspective. Because any other time, like I said, when I saw those revenge stories, if it usually incorporated a female character, it was usually due to like sexual assault, and I didn't actually care for that part of those stories. So I wanted it to be a strong lead without needing that as the catalyst for the journey.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where the character Miranda came from and how I wanted to incorporate her.
Well, revenge is a powerful, powerful force,
Yeah.
and it's like so. Just touching on what you were talking about with Dig Two Graves is that she loses her family. Um, Plus, she's a soldier,
Yes.
So when talking to people about PTSD and stuff like that, were they pretty open about it? Did you have a little bit of pushback, like, why you want to know?
No, the people I have a pretty wide range of friends, and a few of them were all returning servicemen,
Mhm.
who were open enough. because there would be times where you wouldn't see them for long periods of time, and then they would explain, I'm having issues, and so they're fairly open with it, and they were open about their experiences in the military with me. Um, and then of course I looked online. There were stories of soldiers, how they deal with it. A lot of it was because what you see on TV and movies isn't very accurate. I think for a lot of people, especially with soldiers, they get more of the Vietnam flashback representation, and that's how people kind of associate it with. And a lot of it's more of just the overwhelming depression for them. Sometimes the uh, like one friend, it almost is like a bipolar disorder for him, where he
Mhm.
just has moments where he's great, and then it's just overwhelming to them, and they disappear. So there's a lot of different elements. Again, I wanted to touch on it, but I didn't want to drive it too hard. I just wanted to make sure that if somebody did read it who was like a returning serviceman or woman,
Mhm.
they would say, okay, that feels authentic, that feels real. Not just in that part, but in the actual telling of the military part. Again, it starts out after that, but there are elements that touch on it, and I wanted to make sure those were done properly.
I think that's kind of important. So when it comes to kind of researching this, talking to different people and everything, have you ever felt like you got lost in the research, and so you're writing the story and all of a sudden it starts to go in a different direction than you had originally intended?
Yeah, like the part where I was saying earlier, where originally it was gonna get to a moment a lot faster, and then I realized that wasn't really authentic to the characters. So the
Mhm.
story went in another direction, and that part is the darker part of it, in the dealing with a lot of grief. I mean, if somebody loses their family, even if they're out for revenge, that it's a there's a long process of dealing with the grief. Deciding how you want to go forward with your life. So, and it can affect you, and it's when you're dealing with darker issues, or just it can kind of get a depressing feeling. It can be overwhelming a bit. And I think the other book I told you I was working on, Hellrider, is more of a was my escape from that, because that book is more of a like a horror comedy. So that was when I got too far into it, I could step back and kind of touch on that and try to look for the lighter moments in that in the writing.
I think some of the best stories are when we ask ourselves, like, what would we do in that situation? Like, how would you be as a person if you had nothing to lose, right?
Exactly. That was one of the subjects I wanted to really reach on. Is that this usually in those movies and stories of revenge, the person is like the hero for doing this, and I wanted to present it where nobody's necessarily a hero. There are villains, but they're not traditionally like twirl your mustache, just evil from the get-go villains. Everybody has a reason for it, and at some point, revenge, killing for revenge is when you just become a straight murderer. And we wanted to kind of get to that point. I want the reader to be able to read this and realize, okay, so maybe not everything they're doing is something we should be celebrating.
Right, right. So we're almost at the half an hour. Nita, are you there? I wanted to ask her what kind of deviant would you be if you had nothing to lose? Would you be a hero or a villain?
I don't know, man. I'd like to believe I'd be a hero, but if I
Mhm.
had nothing to lose, I don't know. I don't know.
So you wouldn't be like, I'm going down and I'm taking you with me.
Like, I'd like to say I'd be a hero because I've had opportunities to snap on people over the past fucking week and fight over the dumbest shit,
Mm-hmm.
and I've let it go. So yeah, I'd like to believe I'd stay morally sound.
Jim, how about you?
I'd like to think I'd be a hero too, but I don't know. I'd probably just cave in and give up. Who
Embrace
knows?
the dark side. I don't know. That's a tough question. One that I refuse to ask myself because I might be afraid of the answer. We're going to be right back after this break, you guys. We are simulcasting to Geek Insider, Indie Volt, Comics in More New Jersey, as well as RAGIN AVC. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button wherever it is that you're tuning in from. Check out the show descriptions. It's got all the links to Jim Tanner that we can find, as well as Dig Two Graves, which is on Indiegogo. Hit the button, share it out. We'll be right back after this. Okay, comics fans and comics creators, if you want to get your comic books to their destination safely, maybe check out GeminiComicSupply.com. And you can get a 10% discount on your Gemini mailers by using coupon code VOLT10. That's right, get a 10% discount on your Gemini mailers by using coupon code VOLT10, VOLT10. And that is courtesy of Indie Volt. Thank you, Varian Grant. And we are back with our special guest, Jim Tanner. Dig to graves. When what is the toughest part of the creative process for you?
One of the things I learned is the hardest part for me was making edits. You get so invested in the story that you've written and certain scenes, and you're just like, no, I can't lose that. And one of the hardest things I had finding it first was, or I should say, the hardest lesson I learned was find an editor. For anybody who's a writer out there, an editor is your best friend. If you give your book to somebody to read and say, will you look at this? And they come back and say, oh, it's good. That's not editing. That's just somebody being nice, or because they don't know what to say. A good editor will come back with, all right, this needs to probably be taken out. You need to shorten this. You need to extend this. And that's kind of the best thing that I could say I've discovered. But yeah, I still have trouble when it comes to editing a scene. I'll take them out and then I'll just put them in a little folder. I'm like, all right, I'll save this for some other time, because it's like I like it. I'm going to use it some way. So, but that's still my hardest thing to overcome.
I love that you don't throw out your words, Nada. That is perfectly. This is the reason why. This is the perfect reason why. Because sometimes you can take those words, you put them in a file, and they might be okay for something else.
I got scores and
Nada.
scores of stories started, stopped, chunks of segments that'll never probably get used or touched again, but they're there.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote 6, 7 comics in a series once. I was really excited about, and then I read Garth Ennis's The Boys. I'm like, oh, I just wrote that a different way. So that
Oh,
went
I hate when that
right into the
happens.
folder.
I hate when that happens. There are so many things where, I mean, because we're so influenced by the things that we watch, read, and experience, right? So there are no original ideas, but we are original individuals. And so the idea is to put our spin on it. Do you ever struggle with that? Do you ever go, kind of like what you just said? It's like, oh, I wrote that crap. All right, time to go into the folder, let that age a little bit. Do you struggle with that and go, oh man, does this sound too much like XYZ?
Yes, I mean, like you said, there's only I think there's like only so many songs could be written or so many stories to tell. I'd like to think everything I've written is very unique, and that if somebody read it, they could see the differences. But I could see it and say, okay, that's kind of similar, even if it was not intentional, or if I'd never even heard of it. Like at the time, I had never seen The Boys, or this was before the show.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't read it, and then when I finally got around to reading it, I was like, this is really similar. But my style, not Garth Ennis, obviously, he's a great writer. So after a while, you kind of just have to say, you know what, I'm just gonna push forward. Sometimes you just don't have you're gonna eventually run over somebody else's idea or somebody else's concept, and you have to make yours unique enough and uh hope that nobody gets in trouble. That's
Yeah,
probably terrible advice, but yeah, I mean, it's just inevitable.
exactly. Because it's like, okay, well, these are my words. And it's not like, I mean, straight plagiarism obviously is like basically copy paste and put it on there and stuff. But when we come at it with our own unique voice, how we speak, how our characters speak, that's about as original as we can get. And that's tough for a lot of people to let go, because every creator that I've talked to, and even my own struggle, we're like, oh, that's shit. You come back at it, maybe after you've written it, you let it stew for a little bit, and you're like, oh. Do you ever get lost in the editing process? And when do you say that's enough? I have to let it go.
I mean, I might be not answering the question properly, but there's like one story I've been working on for a very long time, probably 2 decades at this point. I've tried to rework it. I've tried to move stuff around. I've started over. I stopped, went back to old ones. I just can't. It's in my head, but I just can't seem to get it on paper. So I've just threw it, in the folder, let it sit, and then maybe one day something will happen. I think I learned or heard a story about Stephen King did that. I want to say with The Stand, he started writing it and then just said this isn't going anywhere and threw it in a drawer for however many years till he went back to it, and all of a sudden, with that fresh eyes, it was like, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that'll happen to me someday. But at this point, after about 2 decades, I'm like, it's probably safe to say it's not going to get done.
Mm-hmm. So what is this when you decided that comic books was kind of like the path that you wanted to do as opposed to, I don't know, writing prose or um, movie scripts and things like that? I've found that a lot of people who don't do comic books just think it's really easy. It's words and pictures, words and pictures. There's so much more to that. When you decided that you were going to create your own, did you ever go like, "Ah, hell, what I do? Why did I do this thing?"
I think I was fairly lucky from when I first started in that I just gave it the whole, it's just for fun kind of attitude,
Hmm.
and just kind of pushing forward. And then when I look back at those first books, I'm like, these really needed some serious rewrites. Uh, so yeah, I don't know.
Well, let's talk about those first few books then. So there, you said that you put them away. So we know you've got a file full of words and stories and things. Have you
Oh,
ever
these were
thought?
these were done. These were completed comic books,
Right, right.
paid for and everything, printed.
Have you ever thought, okay, I'm just going to go back and tweak it?
So yes, so the book I talked about a couple times, Hellrider, is actually one of the first series I wrote and published. It was originally called Rebel Yell, and the concept of it was more at the time like Monster of the Week, Scooby Doo kind of setup.
Hmm.
It was really corny, but it was meant to be really, just cheese fun. But it wasn't really more than just the dynamic of the main characters hunting a monster. There wasn't a lot to it. And then I got together with a group of friends who liked the idea, but they wanted to expand it and create the world. And then that got me thinking. I took some of their ideas, and then it actually became a full story with lots of characters and lots of environments that the other book just never got to. So that's kind of one thing that happened. I wish, obviously, going back, that I had not invested so much time and money until after I thought about it a bit more. But it was a good learning experience. Like I said, I look back, I read it, and I'm like, man, that really needed some rewrites. That was before I had an editor.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was a hard lesson to learn.
You touched on saying that editors are pretty vital when it comes to the stories and things. But when it comes to comic books as a whole, what do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned from like your first outing with it and what you've changed so that you can create an easier path, I guess, now? Like, what was the biggest lesson that you learned besides editing?
Well, when I like you're saying, when I first started, I had been mostly focusing on movie scripts at that point.
Hmm.
This was about 2000, 2002 when I started to really get back into that. And movies and TV is a different story medium than comic books. So you can't just take a comic book and make it a movie and vice versa. And that's one of the reasons I really got back into comics, is because, one, it allowed me to do the stories that I wanted to make, say, a movie of. I could actually make it into a visual medium that I enjoyed, but I had to cater the story to the comic book medium. So it is a bit of a different storytelling aspect to it. The way, it has to flow. It obviously has to be quicker clips at certain parts. You can't linger like you would in a movie. You could show, 30 seconds of somebody's emotional reaction. That tells everything. You don't have that
Right.
option in a
Hmm.
comic book.
Hmm. When you were kind of putting together your script and things, I'm looking at this. What did the description look like, or did you kind of give your artist carte blanche and say this is where she's at? We see pills, we see the bottle, hugging the porcelain goddess.
And so for this script, I was pretty descriptive.
Hmm.
Each panel was laid out. I just described what she's doing, and the actions of what's in the room, what specific room in this case. But I don't have to be with Vaughn. I don't have to give angles or where it's coming from. I'll give an idea if I
Mhm.
really have a specific panel I really want to see. But yeah, he knows the emotional tone just from the story itself. It's a dark moment for somebody who's just at the rock bottom at that point.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, I just kind of I give enough description, and then where he doesn't have to think it through each panel, but it allows him the freedom to say, okay, what do I think will make this look best?
Right. So we're scrolling through your Indiegogo right now. Dig Two Graves graphic novel, you guys. Links are in the show description, and I mean this art is fantastic.
Yeah, he's amazing. I got lucky with him. I've actually worked with a lot of great artists for like variant art and covers
Hmm.
who I found them early enough to where I could afford them, and then they went on to like Marvel, DC, start doing work
Right,
for
and all of
them.
a sudden their
Yeah, now
prices, yeah.
and now it's like, well, I got them at least some of them beforehand. So with Vaughn, I always worry like, man, somebody's going to scoop him up sooner than later because he's amazing.
Right, right. So what was your journey like finding him or finding any artist for your projects?
So the very first project, there was a website a long time ago where pretty much you put what you were and what you were looking for, and then
Hmm.
you could look, oh, I need a inker, I need a letterer, and it worked pretty good. And actually, so Dig Two Graves is actually this is the first book was kickstarted back in 2015 with a totally different artist, and we got funded, and it took well over a year for it to get finished.
Mm.
And I realized there was a problem with deadlines. I was like, I gotta find another team because it's unfortunate, but it's just kind of how it goes. And so I just started looking around, and on Facebook of all places, I just saw him posting some art, and I'm like, this guy's really, really good. I reached out to him. He sent me sample pages. He had done a lot of other indie books, and it just worked out. So I got with him, and I had him do the second book, and then he actually went back and redid the first book. So all the art and everything matches. So there's no continuity problems with that. So
Very cool. Very cool. Um, when can you touch on that with the continuity problems? Because there are a lot of people who are like, "Hey, that was my first book. It is what it is," and now you're seeing how I've improved. I'm kind of interested why you didn't leave it beyond just saying continuity.
well, I'm mostly mean for the art's sake. It was a totally different artist in the first one, so I wanted the art
Okay.
to match and the team to be the same.
Hmm.
Because originally, I mean, there's still a possibility. The idea was getting published through someone, maybe like Image or whoever,
Hmm.
which is difficult in itself. And almost all of them all have the same thing. The art team has to remain the same throughout every book. And also, just I didn't want people who did purchase it go, wait a minute, why is this completely different the second time around? So for
Mm.
anybody who backed on the first Kickstarter years ago, I reached out to them and said, hey, we're doing a new Kickstarter. It's a new artist. The first book's being redone. If you backed it, you'll get the first book again with the new art plus anything you back. So I want them to know, hey, thank you for supporting the first one. You're still going to get uh, that. So that was the main. That's what I meant about the
Very
continuity.
cool.
So but
Very
it
cool.
did also let me have a few extra whacks at some of the dialogue too, so that helped, I suppose.
Uh-huh. Finding the artist has been one of the hardest things for me. It's great to be friends with a bunch of them,
Yeah.
but it's like when you have a story and there's a certain look that you want. I don't know. I'm a very visual thinker. Like a lot of times I'll see the image in my head and I try to translate that into words. And then it's like, okay, from those words, I'm trying to find somebody who will see what's in my head. And so going to things like DeviantArt, Facebook groups, and things like that has been kind of a journey. Um, did you have people who are like, yeah, I'll jump on board, or what? Like, how was your approach in finding people like that? Because there are a lot of writers who are like, hey, I want to make a comic book. I just don't know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, really Facebook groups, DeviantArt, um, they've been really great. I mean, if you see somebody, if he does one picture, I look and see what their other stuff is, and before I do anything, is like, do you have more samples?
Right.
But generally, an artist, their particular art style, I'll say that's what I want to see for my book. And with Vaughn, I can't even remember what he originally did. I want to say it was a Punisher fan art he had been starting, and that's what caught my attention. I was like, that's the feel I want And yeah, I would say that's a great place to look. Is just look at the art of artists whose style you want. I know some people just say, "Hey, I'm looking for an artist who does anime style," and then you'll get inundated with 1,000 people's anime art.
Mhm.
I've had good luck reaching out to people and saying, "Hey, are you open for work?" So there's a mixed bag to that. I had one book where I've gone through 7 artists.
Oh
They
wow.
start and just disappear off the face of the earth.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, I've had the same 1 to 6 pages done by 7 different people at this point. It can be a journey that way. I tell you how much, but when it works, it's great.
Right. Now this looks fun. To be featured in a comic book.
Yeah, for anybody who's familiar with like the Kickstarters, or I'd assume Indiegogo, that seems to be like the pretty standard big tier perk. But I wanted to make it somewhat unique, so I've already written out the book's going to run for 12 issues total,
Oh
and
wow.
I've
Okay.
and I've written out the next. They're in editing, but they're within about the next 6. I leave certain characters kind of open. So if somebody does want to back one of those, be in the book, there's 2 options. One where you're just, you're in the scene, you're drawn, and there's one where you actually have a speaking role. And so I left it open if you want to be a bad guy, if you want to be shot, if you just want to be a good guy, whatever. I want people to feel like, hey, I paid that much. I want to at least kind of decide what happens to me. So there's a few roles I always leave open for those kind of things. So if somebody says that's me, I'm like, perfect. I'm going to write your name in. That'll be you.
So like if I said, "Hey, can you draw in my ex?" That would be cool too.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't see why not. So
See, there you go. And it's like murder without going to jail. I love it. I love it. That's why I love the creative process. I don't have time for jail.
yeah, somebody
So,
asked me like if the book was like some kind of like inner fantasy of mine for revenge, and I was like,
oh my gosh.
I've never had that. And I was like, but no, it's like I said, I just watched too many rated R movies as a kid. So
That touches on a really interesting point too, because a lot of people say, "Hey, write in your own lane, write your experiences, write what you know, right?" But I love writing dark. That doesn't, I mean, do I have to be a serial killer to write about a serial killer? It's like same thing for you. It's like you don't have to go through this in order to express this on paper and share the story of Miranda.
yeah, there's a lot of that. I see where people. I mean, there's always the write what you know, which is important, and that's where I think a lot of people should start. But I noticed that a lot lately, where people are trying to the pigeonhole writers to only be able to write things that fit their mold.
Mm-hmm.
And if that was the case, some of the greatest works of fiction wouldn't exist. Um,
Right.
a good writer can research, a good writer can learn, and create a story that way. And yeah, the perspective might not be as unique as somebody like, say, my character's female, so obviously I can't truly understand the difficulties a woman would struggle with. I can at least present it honestly as possible, um, without pandering to people. So yeah, I say write what you know, but always just feel free to just write. Great stories can come from anywhere.
Great stories can come from anywhere. And if there's anything that's universal, it is our basic emotions, And if you are empathetic at all and you can step into somebody's shoes as best as possible, um, that's the goal for writers, is to make that emotional connection. Fall in love with my characters or hate them, doesn't matter, but as long as it brings about some kind of an emotional reaction, they're going to come back and want more.
Yeah, that's the hope with this. I'm the worst at the elevator pitch, so that's always been my downfall. But like I try to tell people, the story, it has a lot of stories just within it. It's not just Miranda's story. There's the stories of all the characters who, their lives are just as important, and their
Hmm.
stories are just as important. I don't like any like movies or anything where everybody's so one dimensional.
Right.
There's no like, I'm just going to be bad to be bad. We're like, well, that's no fun. So
Yeah. Now tell me about this scary dude.
that is the main character's kind of his go-to enforcer. So there's a bit of a mystery on him, so I don't want to go too far into who he is because it'll definitely get played up more so.
Hmm.
But yeah, he's the guy. If you need something bad done, he's the guy who's going to do it. And then in that same scene, you also have uh, Gonzo, who's the older guy screaming at him. He's the brother of our, quote villain,
Hmm.
who's also right there next to him, smoking.
When, because I'm looking at this and I'm going, oh man, he's like frightening, but he looks like somebody I know. When you're putting together, like ideas for character development and stuff like that, how far into the character development, like what they look like, how tall they are? Obviously this guy's huge. You look at this second panel, right?
Yeah.
So when you're trying to convey that to your artists and things like that, what does that process look like?
So for me, I've been fortunate with Vaughn where I don't always have a very specific image of what the person should look like. Some the certain characters, obviously, I do.
Hmm.
And with him, I just knew I wanted a big, imposing figure. And so I just told Vaughn to just create. And then he gave me a few examples, and I was like, wow, that guy's he looks like just the kind of guy, like if you ran into you'd be just intimidated enough by, but nothing necessarily about him makes him like you're like, oh, that guy's just straight evil. He's just an intimidating presence, and I liked it.
Hmm.
So for me, when I create a character like a very specific in mind, I usually have to use real references. So I'll send like for Miranda, I think originally my concept was Lori Cohen, I think's her name, Lauren Cohen from The Walking Dead,
Hmm.
is who I kind of saw for that character. And then so I send those, and then my artist will just kind of take that and give his interpretation, and then we kind of go back and forth tweaking things until we get to a point where we like it.
Very cool. Very cool. So we're kind of going through the images here for anybody who's tuning in. Um, I am really looking forward to this. And obviously, because the trade paperback, a series, you say that this is looking like 12 issues.
Yeah, so it's been loosely written. So I because I already knew the story was going to conclude. I already know the ending of the story.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not. I don't usually like ongoing. Like for myself, I don't like doing ongoing series, even though I am writing an ongoing series and another one. I love conclusions to stories. So so this one always had a conclusion. I just written it out. Like I said, we've done enough outlines to get to that point. Like okay, it's going to fit into 12. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. It's a little bit harder, obviously, when you're crowdfunding it because on like Marvel and DC, they can get books out, what every month, every other
Oh,
month,
sure.
depending. Whereas I'm lucky to get at this rate maybe 2 out a year, and that's
Hmm.
pretty good for an indie pusher or an indie creator. So
Right.
it's harder to keep an audience that long. So I'm hoping that we can eventually ramp up enough to where we can pump out more than that a year. That's the goal, anyway.
Right. Right. And I'm glad that you said something about the outline and stuff, how you've been able to outline it, because a lot of people who've never done this before, they think just because you have a crowd fund going, whether it's Kickstarter or Indiegogo, that the world stops. It's like, no, I've still got to market this thing. I've still got to write more. There's like so much more going on. Like life continues. It doesn't stop just because you've got a campaign going. It's so weird.
Yeah, and I mean it's definitely fun when you're like the entire staff behind that. I feel like I'm just like pecking away at a keyboard, and I'm like, what am I doing here? But
Right.
yeah, do
It's
what you got to
just
do.
day. Nita teases me. She's like, it's Meredith time. I'm like, no, it's just day. I have day and I have sleep. That's about it.
See, I need a consultant for these. It'll be totally helpful, like you guys do.
So when you said 12 issues,
Mhm.
we've talked to other creators who are like, I have 50 issues in mind. I've got 100 and blah, blah, blah. Does it ever feel too big?
I thought 12 was actually small, but
Hmm.
uh, with revenge stories, even what I'm planning, I think if you go too long, like I like the Punisher. I loved the Punisher as a kid. There's only so much you can do with a character before you're just continually dragging them over broken glass
Hmm.
nonstop.
Hmm.
Um, and again, that goes back to I like a conclusion to stories. I grew up reading X-Men, I grew up reading Batman, all the same superheroes everybody who loves comics do. But I got to the point where I was like, man, nothing's ever final. nobody ever dies. No story, if they do die, they come right back. So,
Right.
but again, yeah, for me, I thought 12 was actually small until, you start, actually crowdfunding. You're like, man, it's a long process here. So, but again, at 40 pages, I try to keep it 40 to 42. I want to keep at least consistent that way. It's still going
Right.
to be a pretty hefty amount of a story overall.
Wow. Well, we're looking forward to that. Now I see I have there's a video here. Do you mind if I play that?
Certainly. I had somebody work on it. I thought it came out great.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me just make sure I've got audio on this thing. I do. All right, let's play that.
In the flash of a gun barrel on an empty street, I saw all that I'd ever wanted. All that I'd ever love. All that I was. Taken from me. Murdered in cold blood. They'll beg for death before I'm done. Someone once said, before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves, a warning about how you can destroy yourself seeking satisfaction. That implies you have something to lose. But if you've already lost everything, grab the fucking shovel.
I had goosebumps when she said, grab the fucking shovel. That was amazing.
Yeah, I would like to point out that, yes, I am aware that it says on Kickstarter. I did not even remember that when I put the video up. It was pointed out to me on the last show I was on. I was like, yeah, I need to update that. So I'm working with somebody to switch it. But of course, with 14 days left, I don't know if that's going to matter at this point. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
I
Well,
did have a voice actress on. She was great.
It's an effective, very effective video. I mean, like I said, I've got goosebumps from it.
Yeah, that, like I said, I reached out to a lady who does voice acting. I was like, here's the lines, and she gave me back several takes. I'm like, wow, this is really good. So and then we put the video together, and I really liked it. So I thought it came out great. One of the things I always wanted to look into was doing it was like the motion comic where you have like the voice actors reading it, and then it kind of is motion. It's something I'd like to look into at some point, but obviously, money can only go so many places. So.
Right, right. So for everybody tuning in, make sure that you head over to Indiegogo, Dig 2 Graves graphic novel. After the brutal murder of her family, Miranda Stone is left with a desire for revenge. There's a flexible goal, 14 days left. He's got 10 backers. Let's get him across that finish line and bring this to life. Ironic, in a way. And final question before we let you go. If somebody who was coming into the industry brand new, what would be the best piece of advice you could give them?
It's just keep trying. I think a lot of people see some of the numbers that are on Indiegogo and Kickstarters and think, oh, all I gotta do is just put a comic on there and I'll be the next Brian Padillo or whoever on there. Was it Ethan Van Sciver who pulls in tons of money? It's a journey. You got to find an audience. I'm still finding mine, so you can't let it discourage you. If you're putting out good books, eventually, hopefully, the audience that you're looking for will find you, and you'll find them.
That's awesome. And that concludes our show, you guys. Thank you for tuning in. This has been Ragin' with Jim Tanner, episode 47. Again, we are simulcasting to multiple channels. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button, share it out with your friends. We talk about the creative journey and as well as their projects. Tune in, go to the show descriptions, and follow Jim everywhere. Just don't peek at his windows. I've said it before. That's kind of weird. Don't do it. Hey, Nita.
Yo.
final words.
Throw my dudes.
We're out of here, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye.